today's episode of Wrenching, I'm showing you to going from this to this. To weld something as a beginner, you need to know some basics about welding machines. I got the request from some viewers to get a little bit more into welding because, as you know, when you own an old 4x4, the technical side of the car is probably not the most hard thing to do because they are old. It's all about welding mostly. And now in this episode we will go a little bit into welding. How to begin it, how to make a little bit of practice before you go on the car, and how does a welding machine work, how to set it right, and now we will go into it. What we have here is my old welder. It is an old Fronius 247 Variostar. It's a 20-year-old welding machine. I have it since I'm 16, it never failed. I started with this welding machine, my welding career, not actually, but a mechanic should know how to weld, because there is always, you rip off bolts or you have to weld a little rust hole or something, so you have to know it. So, let's go into it. What we have here a MAG welder, as you've probably seen it 1,000 times on YouTube or somewhere else. All the fancy stuff and cages are welded with these machines. Let's talk a little bit about the outside of the machine, what we have here. We have here the gas bottle. It welds with a mixed gas. Then we have here the ground wire. And here we have, I would call it pistol. Wir hassen die Englisch, muss jetzt mal. What do you need? And here we have the grip with the nozzle. Here comes the wire out. Then we have in front of it the control panels. This one is for wire speed. It already says how to set the wire speed with what stage, with what gas. Here we have the settings for the amperage of the welding machine. This little knob is when you turn it. So I always weld at 0.5 seconds welding time. That means when you push the trigger one time, it welds half a second if you're off the trigger. These settings around here are not interesting for us, it's for aluminum welding. So this machine could actually, with a different gas and a different wire, weld aluminum, but what we do now, we talk about sheet metal welding for cars, put some rocker cap panels in, a sidewall, something like this, but just the basics. Inside the welding machine we have here the wire. That's the wire spool of the welding machine. It's a 0.8 millimeter wire, what is more than enough for sheet metal welding. I have to say there is a big difference in welding I-beams or just sheet metal. This nozzle can go up to a millimeter, also with the setup what is in the hose. It is actually, everything in this machine is set to weld just car parts. So it is not oversized as you probably see someone welding an I-beam or a pipeline or something like that. And as I said, there is a big difference in amperage and the wire speed and so on and so on. But now we just go car-wise. Then we have here the bottle, as I said before. And we have here the gauges for the bottle, how much pressure is in the bottle. This one is new, so it is full. And this gauge is for how much gas flows out the bottle when I push the trigger. So if I turn on the gas and if I push the trigger, I have to turn it on. If I push the trigger, you hear the gas flowing out and the wire comes out. And I have to admit, this gauge setting is freaking old and probably I hit it 1 or 2 times. So it is not as accurate as it was 20 years ago. On this knob you can normally set how much gas is flowing out the bottle. I normally set it to around 12 liters per minute, what is a good mixture between volume and also that you don't burn too much gas if you do a big job. So everything is, let's say, cheaper. You don't need so much gas if you weld indoors in comparison if you weld something outdoor. If you weld indoors, 12 liters per minute are totally okay. If you weld outdoors and the wind is going, you will see when the wind is pushing away the gas that it starts to spit, so you have to turn it up, but you can't just turn it up to an extent. Everything comes with practice. What we do now, we will start to weld. I will talk a little bit about metal and how to hold the grip, how to set the ground, and how to clean the metal, how to put it together, and in what angle you have to hold the pistol. Now, where we talked a little bit about the outside of the welding machine, how it works and so on, we will go a little bit more into settings. How to set a welding machine to weld, let's say here 0.8 millimeter normal sheet metal. You would use this kind and this thickness of metal on a car. If you make some patches, also the most repair panels around this thickness, 0.6 to 0.8. And now we will go into the settings. So, as I said, here we have the wire speed, here we have the amperage, here we have timing. You don't have to touch timing. Just set it between a second and 0.5 seconds. Normally, when I weld, that is a 247 variostat. It means the welding machine has 247 amps max. So we don't weld sheet metal with 247 amps max. That's why here on the amperage we have 10 stages, and if you have 10 stages and 247 amps, every stage is around 25 amps. How much amps do I need for welding? So on our 0.8 millimeter sheet metal, there is a thumb rule. You can say per millimeter it's about 50 amps, around that. I mean, it is not so precise that it has to be 50 amps. It could be 65 and it still welds well, or even more or some less. Normally my setting for sheet metal like this is stage 3, what would mean 75-ish amps for 0.5 seconds. That's not much. And the wire speed, I mean, there is no rocket science behind it. The machine already tells you how to set the wire speed, and I mean, this is an old machine. If you have a new digital machine, you will set the amperage and she will automatically set the wire speed, so much easier. We have, as I said, 3, and we weld with mixed gas, so we set it here to 3. Easy as pie. Afterwards, when we set it the machine, we go to the metal itself. If you're a beginner welder, that's probably 3 millimeters, take a bar. An important thing before starting welding is clean the metal. You cannot weld on rust. That's just how it is. No grease, no grime. It should be just nice metal. I will clean this bar now, and then we will start welding. Here we have the grip with the nozzle. So before you start welding, you put off the nozzle. Look if it is clean, then you take something like this. Let's call it special tool for cleaning nozzles. I don't know the English name. Clean the nozzle so it is clean from all the welding debris. Then you look if the wire is coming out nice. It does. Cut it off. Put the nozzle on. So then we have here our bar. So how to hold it? The angle you normally should weld should be around 80 degrees. So that would be around that. That would be 90, and that is 80-ish. It is not so precise, because when you weld on a car, there are a lot of spots where you can't do 80 degrees because it is too tight in there, or you are underneath and it is impossible. So let's say 80-ish degrees angle. You weld at 80-ish degrees angle, then your nozzle should not touch the metal. There should be, let's say, 2-3 millimeters in between. And you can use your second hand, put your thumb on the grip, so you can, let's say, get it right, weld more easy, and also stop wiggling. Because if you just, well, I can weld with one hand, but if you start it, it is hard to get it done. So we now take our second hand and put the thumb like this over it, so we can make nice beads, or in this case some nice spots, some nice and precise spots. 80 degrees, thumbs over it, that's how we weld. As I said, we do it like this, and before we turn on the welding machine, one last thing. If you make a bead, don't push it, draw it. Much easier, and you see what you are doing. When you push it, you go over it and you don't really see what you are doing. So if you begin, just draw it, much easier to do it. But as I said, we start with spot welding. So we turn on the welding machine.
It's time to play the game. Time to play the game.
We will start to weld. As I said before, our settings are now free, what is 75-ish amps. And we set it the wire speed, how the welding machine wants it to set it, with the trigger time of a half a second. Okay? 75-ish amps are not enough for this bar actually, but it is for practicing. And afterwards we will weld the little ish metal. So welding hammer important. Normally you should wear some gloves to protect your fingers, because the welding arc is very bright, and it will be, if you weld longer, nice sunburn, or the hot drops of molten metal will burn into your skin. Hurts sometimes, but it's part of the game. We put on the ground here on the wires, because there's a metal plate, so the ground will come over there. And here we have the positive, and we will make a short circuit. As I said, hand down. So what we see now here, I made 3 spots because this bar is so thick, we don't weld into it. So we build actually up what we don't want. So I will get with the setting up to 6 and set the welding machine up. And now we will see the difference. Everything is about the amperage, but it is for you just practicing. Set it up so you make some nice spots. Always the angle has to be somehow right, okay? Just start to make spots. Make one spot after another spot after another spot, just to try to make, let's say, a nice spot bead. Not a real bead, just spot after spot after spot. Because on a car it is mostly spot welding, you don't make like real beads. It would be just too much heat. As I said, you can practice it, and now we will go how it sounds when there is no gas. We turn off the gas on the welding machine. Let's wait until the gas is out. So it's out. Right. That is how it sounds and how it looks without gas. You hear that? That is welding without gas. We will go into the wrong angle. Let's say we are too far away. Way too far away to weld actually. You hear that? That means more or less you're just too far away and you don't make a real spot, you just do something but actually not welding. And then the wrong angle. Let's say we do it way too steep. It is the same noise. But you get a feeling for it, how it should sound, how it should work. And it's now we make, let's say, a better one. It is hot. Here we have how it should actually look, more or less. I mean, you see it is too high, so I should turn down actually the wire. Here we have the first spot with not enough amperage for this thickness of metal. This should be more or less the right one. I mean, it is 3mm, I welded with 6. I could turn it up a little more to get like a nice burned in spot. Here we have without gas, too far away, wrong angle. As I said, just take a bar, just get used to how the angle should work, how to set the machine, with like the thumb rule, 50 amps per millimeter. And now we will go a little bit more into thin metal welding. Here the same, I will show you first how it should be. I mean, I am not a pipeline welder, just mechanic, but it should be okay. As you have seen, I tried around a bit. It is actually on this piece stage 4 and a little bit more wire speed. It is actually below 4. That's why I said it is gut feeling, you hear it, if it is right or not right. And when you look on the sheet metal, that is how it should supposed to look like. You see it is burned in right, and you have a nice heat pattern around it. That was somehow too cold and the wire speed was too much actually, and now the wire speed is okay. So, we make some spots. As you have seen on the beginning when I did the first spot weld, the angle was too steep, so I made a little build up, and the rest is okay, a little too hot, but it will glue the metal together. As I said, just a feeling thing. Now I will show you what will happen if you turn it up way too high on thin metal. Just look away. We burn through it. We burn straight through the metal. And it was a way too high setting, and this is how it looks like then. It just burn through it. I mean, on sheet metal welding or panel welding, it is not rocket science. Sure, a professional welder could probably tell you how or so how the setting should be correct and everything nice and so on and so on. But the reality of this thing is, who does it at home? It doesn't matter, he just wants to weld in some rocker panels to get rid of the rust holes. And that is what matters actually. Sure, you can make it perfect, but is there a need for it? You cannot make it perfect at the beginning. It will just take time. Our next thing is welding two metal pieces together. You can glue it like this together, edge on edge. What is, I wouldn't say too difficult, but you should do some practice before. It is easy to burn through it if you put it edge on edge. So it is easier in the beginning to put the metal, let's say this is the old metal of the car and you want to weld in a patch on an area you don't see so easy. So somewhere on the undercarriage of the car, then you can put it on like this. I mean, I normally weld edge on edge, make a nice spot bead and then grind it down, and afterwards you don't actually see that something was welded. Here is everything about basics. We will put the two sheet metal like this together. Very important on this thing is that when you weld on sheet metal on sheet metal, and you put it on, you have to look for, there is no gap in between. If it is like this and you try to weld it, you will make a spot weld on the first layer, burn the first layer through, and then it will somehow attach to the second layer, and it just will look awful. So you have to be sure it is nice together, one metal touches the other metal on the edge you want to weld. If you have an area where you can easy access, you just take a vice grip like this, take the second vice grip, this, and now we have patched it nice together. You can also take afterwards a hammer if it is still a little off and hammer it down before, so it is really close together. A little trick of mine, we will loosen the vice grips again. To the old BMW behind us, let's say we want to weld in this area. I mean, you can't weld on rust as I said, but it is just for showing it off. My little trick is you can't put vice grips on here. It's nearly impossible. Let's say there is your rust hole, there's just where to attach the vice grip, nowhere. So I normally just take the hammer, push the hammer on the sheet metal, and then make my welding spot. Because there is not always room to put some vice grips on, or you have the wrong vice grips. So it's always a little difficult to weld on cars because nearly nothing is flat. There is always somewhere a round shape or an edge or just something what makes it difficult. And now, as I said, we will do it with vice grips. I will weld this panel through with spot after spot after spot after spot. Then we will talk a little bit about heat. But now, watch me make some spots. So, put the thing over here. Oh, it holds. I will set back my welding machine to the setting I had before. When I made the first nice little spots, we look a little bit in the nozzle looks clean. I will take my welding helmet. Yeah, and the thing with the welding helmet, I know it is, when you start to weld, not so easy to weld with a helmet. Because when you push the trigger, you have the bright arc and it gets automatically in the helmet dark, so you don't actually burn your eyes. In the beginning, from what I remember, like 15 years ago, it is quite annoying, but trust me, I burned my eyes like 6 or 7 times. It's a night of pain, real pain. So my advice is use a helmet. It doesn't matter if you have on gloves. I mean, everybody burned his finger somewhere, hurts. But the eye thing, whew, it's not worth it, trust me. Just practice enough so you get used to the helmet. And buy something like this, what fits on your head, and no welding visor where you hold it with one hand and with the other hand you have to weld. Just don't. These things don't cost a ton of money, and you have fancy flames on these ones. You can weld 100% faster with flames on it. I will make here some spots, what would actually look afterwards a little bit like a bead, but not a real bead, as you have seen. Wait, I can touch it. Here, that is not a real bead, that is just a spot bead. I can make you afterwards a bead so you see the difference, but that's a spot bead. That is more than enough for sheet metal repairs. It is really enough. To make like a real bead, you would put so much heat into the metal, and especially if you put in a wheel arch or something like this, it will warp. It will warp, and afterwards you will have much more problems than before, because you have to put so much bond on it to get it somehow straight. Just don't do it. As I said, yet now we make our life nice. Turn off the welding machine, easier to talk without it. As you see, I welded it together. Here around we see the heat into the metal. We see it is connected. Actually it was a little too hot because we welded through it. I should have turned it a little down. Did occur some damage? No. If we now take an angle grinder, we do, and some very used safety goggles, we can grind it down. If I can give you one advice, invest in some new technology. An angle grinder without the cable. I should have done this years ago. I grinded it down, and actually we put 2 pieces of metal above each other, but it still doesn't look bad. So if you weld something in the undercarriage of your car, truck, 4x4, whatever, you can do it like this, and it still will not look awful. If you just want to close a hole and you don't want to make a top-notch restoration for the SEMA show. So we'll do it. What I don't said before is you can, or you should, apply some rust primer before you weld it on. So on the underside, if you watch some of my other videos. Put some anti-rust primer on. And now I will show you another thing we can do with Absetzzange. We don't even know how it is called on English. We call it on the German word Absetzzange. I found out that thing is not Absetzzange, it is on English Bevelling Pliers. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but we go with it. What does this thing do? As I said before, I like to put edge on edge, so I have afterwards I grinded it down, a nice flat surface. So if you're not really able to do it, or it is difficult, or actually sometimes I work with the
Bevelling Pliers.
Here we have the 61, and you see here the wheel arch and here the old sidewall, and you see it is welded in all the way. Here actually I used some beveling plier, and now we will go into it how beveling plier works. As you see, you have here a little drop in it. You put your sheet metal in it. It is not rocket science. If you buy one of these, actually don't buy a Chinese one. One, and it worked actually one pushing. So you put it in there, press it. Thank you God I just make such a little itchy bitchy tiny sheet metal things boomsty. What did the beveling plier do? We put a little edge in it. And if we take now a second piece of sheet metal, I will use some pliers so it is actually easier to see for you. Vice grip. Second wire strip. So what you see now is with the beveling plier, as I said before, I like edge on edge, and we will take this not so straight piece of sheet metal. We are actually on one level, and that will look much better if you grinded it down. And the next thing I will do is I set here some welding spots with the same settings because it already worked. Take our helmet to don't burn our eyes. Take our welding torch, grip, whatever it is called. Look that we have ground. So that is what I meant before, work with two hands, much easier. You have seen I work just welded with one hand, and just a little last four spots are actually nice. The first ones I wiggled around, but now I will grind it down and you will see it will actually look nice. We grinded it down, and what you see is actually, I mean here I don't weld it, but where I welded, it is one nice solid piece of metal. Because we use the beveling plier tool, whatever. And the last thing I will show you is edge on edge. To put something together, edge on edge. And this is where it starts to be difficult. So, if you put it edge on edge, let's say you did that, edge on edge. The thing is with edge on edge, it's difficult because you actually have not much room for failure. What does I mean with you have not much room for failure? If you put something edge on edge, and let's say you put in a rocker panel, and the rocker panel is 1.5 meters long, your cut has to be for 1.5 meters really precise. So the thing you cut out and the other thing you weld in, it just has to be a tight fit. If you make like a gap, difficult, then you need practice to close the gap. You can build bridges and so on and so on. Will be not part of this episode because this will be a more part series, because I cannot get sheet metal welding into one episode. That will be a 7-hour long episode. So let's go with, we put it edge on edge, weld it together, afterwards we grind it down, and you will see it looks like the same with the beveling tool. But it is easier to burn through it. We take our welder, our nozzle is still clean. So that is what I meant with it is easy to burn through. That is just actually the reality. I mean, if you see something on YouTube or Instagram, and the welds and the beads look just perfect. It is mostly too good to be true, because every real car guy just can tell you a story about how it really works, and mostly involved is the angle grinder to make it somehow look nice. Or you have something with a lot of room and you are really concentrated and practice before and then make a really nice beat, but they are always a little off. So let's grind it down and then look at it. Yeah, I could grind it down even more, but to show you about what it is actually. So same here. I mean, I told you before with the heat. So we have also here, like here, a really good surface, not perfect, but good. Nothing is perfect. It is just, let's say, more difficult because I burned through and had to close the weld with some fast tips on the trigger. And that just needs practice. So for you it is probably easier to get a beveling tool or just put sheet metal on sheet metal. So, and now we are nearly through everything in terms of basics. I mean, there would be some more, but it's just about sheet metal, not beams, no nothing. My advice now for you, if you're Christmas is coming, you spend some money on a good welder. My advice also here would be buy a used welder from a brand with a name before you buy, let's say, I don't want to say the name of the country.
Let's say China. 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 China.
Let's say you buy a cheap welder, what looks nice but doesn't work nice. And probably in 5 years, if something fails, you have problems to get parts. I would recommend just buy something used. Easier and cheap. And then it's all about practice. You just have to practice, practice, practice before you start to weld on a car, because the biggest disappointment if you do it like that is you start it on a car and then you look at it and it just looks awful and you will be frustrated. So do some practice. And as I said, it will be a more part series. The next thing is we will make something sheet metalish or buy a repair panel and weld something in. And it will be the same as on this episodes. We will talk a lot and hopefully this helped someone. And as you see on this nice BMW from the 70s, rusty as... If you liked this episode, please subscribe and follow us on social media. And we see us on the next episode of Wrenching.